emotional. He whispered something to her in the dark, half dead and barely breathing. Are you an angel? Are you here to take me? She looked him straight in the eyes and said, Not tonight. Tonight I'm just the waitress. But after that night, nothing about her life would ever be ordinary again. Because you don't save the King of Chicago and walk away unchanged. This is a channel for stories about love born in chaos, loyalty tested by fire, and families, chosen or blood, that will fight to the last breath for each other. You never know which ordinary moment will become the one that defines the rest of your life. If that line gave you chills, you're exactly where you belong. Like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs it today.
The Midnight Owl Diner was a 1980s relic on a forgotten highway outside Chicago, smelling of old coffee, strong bleach, and fried food. It was a haven for the lost, the lonely, and anyone hiding in the early morning darkness. Nora Hayes liked the late shift. At 24, it covered her rent and let her study old nursing textbooks without being bothered by daytime people. Outside, heavy rain hammered against the diner's windows. The neon sign was broken, reading "The Midnight O," and it buzzed loudly. Nora was wiping a booth, worrying about rent for her tiny Logan Square apartment. Only two others were there: a truck driver named Pete sleeping over his food, and Mr. Henderson, a deaf old mechanic doing a crossword puzzle. Then the bell on the door did not just ring, it was violently destroyed. The glass door flew open with so much power it cracked the frame. Wind and rain poured in, carrying that unmistakable metallic smell. Two men fell inside. The first was huge, his face filled with panic, his expensive suit soaked in rain and dark blood. He was holding up the second man, who was just dead weight. Pete the trucker woke with a start. He saw the black Glock pistol in the big man's hand, and that was enough. Pete bolted from his booth, tossed a wrinkled $20 bill down, and ran out the back door. Mr. Henderson never even looked up, focused on finding a six-letter word for disaster. Nora was frozen behind the counter, a wet cloth in her fist. "Lock the door now," the man standing yelled, his Irish accent thick with panic. His sandy hair was wild, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. This was Finnick O'Connor, but Nora did not know that yet. Nora couldn't move. Her heart pounded in her chest. "I said lock the door." Finnick pointed the gun straight at her. "Now, sweetheart, if you do not want to become a casualty." Her survival instinct finally took over. Nora dropped the rag, ran to the door, forced it shut against the storm, and threw the deadbolt. She pulled down the metal blinds, her hands shaking badly. When she looked back, Finnick had placed the other man on the front counter, knocking napkin, holders, and salt shakers onto the floor with a huge crash. The man on the counter wore a costly charcoal suit, now torn and soaked in the growing pool of blood underneath him. His face, however, made Nora gasp. Even pale and twisted in pain, his features were incredibly sharp. He had high cheekbones, a strong jaw with dark stubble, and black hair stuck to his forehead. She knew who he was. Anyone in Chicago who followed the news would recognize that face. Declan Fitzpatrick, the new boss of the Fitzpatrick crime family, a man said to run the docks, the unions, and many politicians. He was a ghost, a monster in a fine suit, and he was dying right on her pastry case. "He is hurt badly," Finnick choked out, pushing hard, on Declan's right side below the ribs, and at another wound near his collarbone. Blood pulsed through Finnick's fingers with a frightening regularity. "The clinic is 20 minutes from here. He is not going to make it. He is losing too much." "Call for an ambulance," Nora whispered, her voice shaking. "No police, no hospitals," Finnick growled, turning on her with the gun raised again. "The Russo family has eyes on every emergency room in a 10-mile radius. They set up the ambush. He is a dead man if he goes to a hospital." Declan groaned, his head falling to the side. His lips were turning a frightening blue. The pool of blood on the counter grew larger, dripping onto the floor. "He is going into hypovolemic shock," Nora said. The words came out before she could think. 2 years of nursing school, which ended when her mother got sick, suddenly came rushing back. Finnick just stared, his gun shaking. "What did you say?" "His blood level is dropping way too fast," Nora said, her voice gaining strength as her old training took over. She was still terrified, but a dying man needed help, even if he was a known killer. "If that arterial bleed is not stopped now, his heart will fail in under 3 minutes. "Then you fix him," Finnick shouted, pulling her forward by her apron. "Do something, or I swear you will die with him." "Put down the gun, or he dies now," Nora yelled back. The sheer command in her tone surprised them both. She pushed Finnick's hand off her apron. "I cannot operate with a gun pointed at me. Go wash your hands at the sink behind the grill. Use hot water and plenty of soap. Do it now." Finnick was stunned by the waitress giving him orders, but another weak moan from Declan made him move. He put the Glock in his pants and hurried to the kitchen. Nora moved with intense focus. She ran to the back room, kicking the door open to get the large first aid kit off the wall. She knew it was not nearly enough. Gauze would not stop this. She ran by the kitchen, grabbing 2 clean aprons, a bottle of cheap, strong vodka for Mr. Henderson's coffee, and a large roll of silver duct tape. Back at the counter, Nora pushed Finnick away. "Point your phone's flashlight on him and hold it steady." She opened the vodka, pouring it over her hands and flinching from the burn before pouring it on Declan's wounds. Declan's eyes shot open. They were a stormy gray, wide with pain and shock. A loud, terrible scream came from his throat as his hand flew out and grabbed her wrist like a steel trap. "Be still," Nora said, making herself meet his terrifying gaze. "I know that hurts. You have been shot. I need to find the source of the bleeding." Declan's look was wild and unfocused, but his eyes stayed on her face. His grip was painful, but he did not move her hand away. He was struggling to breathe, his chest moving unevenly. Nora used kitchen scissors to cut away the ruined shirt, revealing his muscular and tattooed chest. The collarbone injury was messy, but had missed anything vital. The wound on his right side was the real problem. Dark, oxygen-poor blood was pumping out steadily. He had a damaged liver or a major vein. "Gauze," Nora ordered. Finnick shoved the box at her. She packed the wound with a lot of sterile gauze, but it immediately soaked through. "It is too deep inside." "Pressure is not working," she said, her professional calm about to crack. "I have to cauterize it." "Cauterize it!" Finnick screamed. "Have you lost your mind?" "You work in a diner. I am the only one here who can help," Nora shot back. "Go to the grill. Grab the metal spatula for icing. Turn the burner on high and heat it until it is bright red. Now." Finnick did not question her again. He rushed to the grill. The clicking of the igniter echoed in the diner, followed by the whoosh of the flame. Nora looked at Declan. He was slipping away again, his eyes closing. "Hey, you need to stay with me," she said, lightly tapping his cheek. "Do not you dare close your eyes." Declan's lips moved, forming a quiet whisper she could barely hear over the storm. She bent down close to his mouth. "Angel," he rasped, a small bloody bubble on his lips. "Are you here to take me away?" "Not this time," Nora whispered back with intensity. "Tonight, I am only your waitress." "It is hot!" Finnick yelled, coming back with the spatula wrapped in a towel. The tip was glowing a frightening, angry orange. "Hold his shoulders down tight," Nora ordered Finnick. "He is going to fight this." "Use all your weight." Finnick pressed down on his boss, holding his powerful shoulders flat against the pastry display. Nora drew in a sharp breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. She had only one chance at this. If she was off by a fraction of an inch, she would destroy healthy tissue and he would die anyway. "I am so sorry," she whispered to Declan. She forced the glowing hot metal deep into the wound, aiming for the gushing source of the bleeding. The sound of cooking flesh was horrifying, and the terrible, sharp smell of burnt meat instantly filled the diner. Declan unleashed a scream so loud, so full of pure pain, that it rattled the windows. His whole body arched with such force that it almost threw the massive Finnick off. Declan's hands desperately clawed at the counter until his knuckles were white. Then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he finally, thankfully, passed out from the agony. Nora quickly pulled the spatula back and dropped it into the steel sink with a loud clatter. She grabbed a stack of clean linen aprons, folded them into a thick pad, and pushed it firmly over the cauterized wound. She then wrapped heavy duct tape all the way around Declan's torso, securing the makeshift bandage tightly against his body. She stepped away, breathing heavily, her own uniform soaked with his blood. She stared at his chest. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. It moved up, then down, shallow, but regular. The bleeding had stopped. Finnick felt for a pulse on his boss's neck. He exhaled a sound that was half sob, half relief. He is alive. Oh my God, he is alive. 30 minutes later, the squeal of tires outside signaled the arrival of a sleek, black, unmarked medical van. 3 figures rushed inside, with the leader being a sharp, well-dressed older woman who carried 2 large black medical kits. She was Dr. Sofia Calvetti, the crime syndicate's private trauma surgeon. Sophia surveyed the scene, the blood-covered counter, the bottle of vodka, the roll of duct tape, and the scorched spatula. She quickly checked Declan's vital signs and examined the bandage. Her gaze shifted to Nora, who was huddled near the coffee makers, shaking even in the warm diner. "You are responsible for this?" Sophia asked, her words clipped by a thick Italian accent. Nora could only give a numb nod. "You saved his life," Sophia stated plainly. "A millimeter to the left, and you would have destroyed his liver. It was a brutal method, but it was perfect. He would have bled to death 20 minutes ago." The medical team loaded Declan onto a stretcher with swift efficiency. As they carried him out, Finnick paused in front of Nora. He dug into his bloody jacket and took out a thick wad of $100 bills held by a rubber band. He set it on the counter. It looked like at least $10,000. "You did not see anything tonight," Finnick stated, his voice quiet and intensely serious. "No cops. You do not talk to your friends. Nothing. For your own safety, you need to forget any of this happened." Nora just looked at the money, stained with blood. When she finally looked up, she was alone in the diner. The only evidence that the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld had nearly bled out on her counter was the drying puddle of blood on the tile and the lingering smell of metal in the air. 3 weeks went by. For Nora, it felt like a lifetime spent holding her breath. She used the first 3 days to scrub the diner from top to bottom with bleach, her hands becoming raw as she tried to remove the phantom smell of burned blood. She refused to touch the money, hiding the blood-stained cash inside a hollowed-out book under her floorboards. It felt like holding a curse. She checked the news every single morning, fully expecting to see a report about the death of Declan Fitzpatrick, but she found nothing. There were no death notices and no new gang wars breaking out. The syndicate's legitimate businesses, like shipping and real estate, continued to operate as usual. It was almost as if that chaotic night at the Midnight Owl had been some kind of terrible dream. Nora attempted to slip back into her daily life. She served breakfast to Pete the trucker, poured coffee for Mr. Henderson, and returned home to her small, cold apartment on the 3rd floor. But things were no longer normal. New shadows were creeping in. It began with subtle things. A black car would be parked at the end of her block whenever she came home. A man in a long coat would sit in the same booth, drinking black coffee and just watching her for his entire shift. Nora tried to convince herself she was just being paranoid. The Fitzpatrick syndicate wanted her to forget, which meant they were leaving her alone. That is how it was supposed to work, she thought. She was completely mistaken. She just had no idea who was really watching her. It happened on a Tuesday night, one of her few evenings off. Nora was walking up the poorly lit alley behind her apartment, holding a bag of groceries. The overhead lights flickered, creating long, twisted shadows around the dumpsters. Nora Hayes. The voice emerged from the dark area near a fire escape. Nora stopped dead, her hands clutching the paper grocery bag. A man appeared in the weak light. He was not one of the men she had seen at the diner. This man was thin, wearing a cheap leather jacket, with a nasty scar that ran from his ear down to his neck. He had a cruel, crooked smile. Two other men stepped out from the darkness behind him, cutting off her path to the street. "Who are you?" Nora asked, stepping backward until she felt the hard brick wall behind her. "The name is Dominic," the scarred man said with a casual air, sliding a long, serrated knife from his belt. "I am an associate of Tobias Russo. Perhaps you know the name." Nora felt a chill go through her. The Russo family were the rivals, the ones who had set up the attack on Declan. "I do not know who you are talking about," Nora lied, her voice shaking. "I have no money. You can just have the groceries." Dominic let out a dry, scratchy laugh. "We are not interested in your groceries, sweetheart. 3 weeks ago, we had a very important target cornered on Highway 41. We shot him twice. We saw him bleeding. He was supposed to die right there. But then, our source tells us he somehow survived. And the story is that his car was seen outside some dirty little diner before he was taken to a private doctor." He moved a step closer to her. The knife's blade glinted in the dim light. "Toby Russo is not happy. That operation cost him a lot of money. He really wants to know how Declan Fitzpatrick managed to live, and he wants to send a message to the person who decided to help him." "I have no idea what you mean," Nora said, her breathing becoming ragged with fear. She frantically looked around for a way to escape, but the alley was a dead end. "Get her," Dominic ordered his men. "Put her in the trunk. Toby wants to deal with her personally." The two larger men moved toward her at once. Nora screamed and hurled the heavy grocery bags straight at the first man's head. Cans of food and fruit scattered across the ground. She made a desperate attempt to run past them, but a strong hand grabbed her by the hair, pulling her back so hard she saw spots. She was slammed into the brick wall, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Dominic came closer, pressing the cold, flat side of his blade against her cheek. "Stupid girl, you are going to do a lot of screaming tonight." Out of nowhere, the sound of a powerful engine filled the quiet alley. A large, armored black SUV sped into the tight space, its headlights blindingly bright. It did not slow down at all. It crashed right into one of Dominic's men, pinning his leg against a dumpster with a terrible snapping sound. The man screamed and fell to the pavement. Dominic spun, trying to see past the bright lights as he aimed his gun. But before he could shoot, the back doors of the SUV burst open. 4 men jumped out, all moving with a frightening and practiced speed. The quiet hiss of silenced weapons cut through the night. Dominic's other man fell immediately, grabbing at his shattered knee. Dominic himself was hit in the shoulder, which spun him around and made him drop his knife into the shadows. "Do not move, you Russo trash," a familiar, deep Irish voice spoke. Finnick emerged from the darkness, pointing a large assault rifle right at Dominic's head. "Or I will splatter your brains all over this wall." Nora slid down the wall as her legs gave out from under her. She was shaking violently, just staring at the shocking scene. The rear door of the SUV opened a bit more. A figure emerged into the cool night. He walked more slowly than before, using a cane with a silver handle for support, but his presence was just as intense and powerful. Declan Fitzpatrick was dressed perfectly in a dark suit. The man who had looked so close to death in the diner was gone. In his place stood the ultimate predator of Chicago, his piercing gray eyes focused entirely on Nora. He approached her, and the sound of his cane tapping on the ground echoed above the groans of the wounded men. He came to a stop directly in front of her and looked down. "Dominic," Declan said, his gaze never leaving Nora. His voice was calm, deep, and held complete authority. "You will tell Toby Russo that if he ever sends his men into my part of the city again, I will not just eliminate his men. I will burn his entire mansion to the ground with him inside it." Go to hell, Fitzpatrick, Dominic spat out between clenched teeth. Declan paid him no attention. He gave a small nod of his head. Finnick moved forward and struck Dominic hard on the jaw with the stock of his rifle, knocking him unconscious. Declan finally bent down, showing a slight grimace of pain as the motion strained his healing injury. He held out a large, warm hand to Nora. I tried to tell you I was only a waitress, Nora whispered, looking at his offered hand like it was a weapon. Your man told me to forget. I tried to let it go. I know, Declan murmured, his hardened expression easing for just a moment. And I tried to leave you alone. But the Russos don't dismiss things as chance, so my men kept an eye on you to make sure your identity was safe. Tonight, they found out. So what happens now? Nora asked, the final bit of her strength giving way to tears. You saved me, so we're square. Just let me walk away. Declan's jaw clenched. Taking her hand, he pulled her to her feet with a firm but gentle touch. The warmth from his hand was a shock against the alley's chill. We are not square, Nora, he stated, his stare locking with hers. You brought me back from the dead. In my world, that creates a blood debt. Toby Russo now knows exactly who you are. If I let you go, you will not live to see the sunrise. I can run, she insisted. I know how to disappear. They will find you, Declan answered, his voice lowering to a deep rumble that made her skin crawl. But they will not dare touch what's mine. Nora's eyes flashed in disbelief. I do not belong to you. You do now, Declan said, moving to the waiting vehicle. Get in the car, Angel. You will not be going back to the diner. The Fitzpatrick property in Lake Forest was less a home and more a fortress, disguised as a tribute to generational wealth. The massive limestone mansion sat on 10 acres of perfect lawns above the restless, dark waters of Lake Michigan. It was protected by 12-foot wrought iron gates, advanced thermal cameras, and guards in expensive suits who moved with the disciplined stillness of former soldiers. Nora awoke tangled in cool, heavy linens, lying on a mattress more comfortable than any she had ever known. The huge room was done in quiet shades of slate gray and cream. Towering windows revealed a stunning and frightening view of the lake. She went to open the balcony's French doors, but the polished brass handle was locked tight from the other side. A sharp, cold panic cut through her exhaustion. She was a prisoner in a luxurious, expensive cage. Tossing back the blankets, she saw she was in a silk nightgown that was not hers. Her own clothes, her jeans and bloody work uniform, were gone. She spotted a thick cashmere robe on a velvet chair, wrapped it securely around herself, and strode to the heavy oak door. It swung open silently into a long, carpeted hall adorned with priceless paintings and old-fashioned lights. Standing just outside her room was a familiar face. It was Finnick, with his hands held neatly behind him. He seemed much calmer than he had been at the diner, wearing a pressed white shirt and gray vest. The sophisticated look, however, was spoiled by the clear outline of a gun beneath his arm. Good morning, Miss Hayes, Finnick said, his Irish accent polite but firm. I hope you rested. Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, has set out some clothes for you in the dressing room. Breakfast is ready in the sunroom. I do not want breakfast, Nora replied, her voice strained. I want my things and a taxi to my apartment. Finnick gave her a smile that was both kind and absolute. I am sorry, but that is not possible. The boss was very clear. You cannot leave the house alone, and you are definitely not going back to your place. That has been taken care of. It has been emptied. Everything you own is on its way here. He emptied my apartment? Nora's voice climbed, bouncing off the tall, arched ceiling. He is not allowed to do that. This is kidnapping. Think of it as a relocation to keep you alive, dear, a sharp voice cut in. Nora spun around to see Dr. Sophia Calvetti approaching with a leather medical case. The doctor gave a short nod. Tobias Russo's crew set fire to your building at 4 o'clock this morning. The official story is a gas leak. The real story is 3 guys with gas cans. You would be dead if Declan had not gotten you out of there. The news struck Nora like a fist. Her legs buckled, and she had to brace herself against the door. Her school books, the old photos of her mom, the entire small life she had worked so hard to create, was gone. The feeling of loss was immense and overwhelming. But that grief was quickly consumed by a white-hot rage. "Where is he?" Nora snapped, her gaze sharp with fury. Finnick paused, glancing at Dr. Calvete, who just gave a slight shrug. "He is in his study. He just completed his IV treatment, so try to keep him calm." Nora ignored the advice and the need for a guide. She stormed past Finnick, making her way through a maze of corridors until she reached a pair of enormous mahogany doors. Two more quiet, formidable guards stood on either side. They moved out of her way without a word, pulling the doors open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of leather, strong coffee, and a hint of antiseptic. Declan Fitzpatrick was at a huge desk made of dark walnut. He was pale, with dark smudges under his intense gray eyes that stood out against his angled face. He had on a dark Henley. The shirt was loose to fit over his thick bandages. He was reviewing a pile of financial papers with sharp focus. He glanced up when she burst in, and the irritation in his eyes was replaced by a closed-off, neutral look. "You destroyed my life," Nora accused, her voice trembling with anger as she stopped at his desk. "Toby Russo destroyed your apartment," Declan corrected her calmly, placing his expensive gold pen on the desk. "I told you they would come for you. I only ensured you were not there when they did." "So what am I supposed to do now?" she shouted, gesturing wildly. "Become your pet in a gilded cage?" "I have my own life, Declan. I have tuition for nursing school. I have bills to pay." Declan rose from his chair. He moved slowly, trying to hide the pain from his wound, but his large frame still filled the space. He reached for a slim black card. He tossed the American Express Centurion card onto the desk between them. "Your debts are gone," Declan stated, his voice a deep growl. "Your tuition for the nursing program at Chicago Memorial is covered for the next 4 years. It was paid through a private fund. Use this card for everything else." Nora looked at the black card like it was poison. "You think money fixes this? That you can buy me after pulling me into your war?" Declan came around the desk, a slight limp in his step, and stopped right in front of her. He towered over her, forcing her to crane her neck to meet his eyes. This close, she saw the strain etched around his lips, the evidence of the effort it took to run his world while his body healed. "I do not buy people, Nora," Declan said, his voice becoming softer. The cold command of a mob boss faded, revealing a tired man. "I protect what belongs to me. You saved me. You reached into my chest and brought me back from the edge. That is why Russo is after you now. You will remain here until Tobias Russo is eliminated and his entire operation is destroyed. You will have security. You will have everything you need. But you are not to go beyond these gates." "And how long will that be?" she asked in a low voice, her anger fading into a chilling fear. Declan's large, rough hand came up, and his thumb gently tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. The touch was so unexpectedly gentle, it sent a shock through her. "As long as it takes to clean up the city," he replied quietly. "Welcome to the family, Angel." The next 2 weeks passed in a strange and stifling haze. Nora could go anywhere inside the mansion or the enclosed gardens, but she was never out of sight of the guards. She passed the time in the enormous 2-story library, studying the rare medical books and new journals that Declan had arranged for her. She started to understand the household's patterns. She knew Declan took his coffee black, survived on less than 4 hours of sleep, and conducted meetings in the basement that left his associates shaken and pale. She discovered his reputation for brutality was matched by a quiet, frightening intelligence. He commanded not with shouts, but with cold, deliberate strategy. And she realized he was observing her as well. She would often glance up from a book and see him in the library doorway, resting on his cane. It was a cane with a silver handle. The space between them felt heavy, full of a silent tension that was a mix of thankfulness, confinement, and a growing, risky attraction. He always kept his distance, yet his nearness was a constant weight defining her new life. This delicate peace was broken on a Thursday evening. A thick, suffocating humidity rolled in from Lake Michigan, unleashing a fierce thunderstorm that shook the house. Declan had summoned his closest advisors for an urgent meeting. His top captains, including Finnick and a sharp-looking man named Silas, were assembled in the dining room, pretending it was a simple dinner. Nora tried to hide in the library with a chapter on heart medication, but the loud, indistinct arguments from down the hall made it impossible to concentrate. The syndicate was losing a fortune. Russo's crew had stolen 3 shipping containers right from the Chicago port, and the fight back was getting expensive. Around 11 p.m., the massive oak doors to the dining room flew open. Nora was just leaving the library when she saw Silas stagger into the hall. The capo's face was ashen, covered in a sudden, heavy sweat. He grabbed his chest, his eyes rolled back, and he crashed onto the imported Persian rug. His body immediately started to shake in violent, stiff spasms. The scene exploded into chaos. Finnick instantly drew his weapon, his eyes scanning the empty hall for any danger. Declan followed close behind, his expression a mask of pure, cold rage. "Bring Sophia here now," Declan yelled, falling to his knees next to his convulsing lieutenant. Nora acted on instinct. A surge of adrenaline erased any fear she had of the armed men around her. She raced down the hall and slid to her knees next to Silas. "Get out of the way," she ordered Declan, pushing his shoulder. "He is having a heart attack," Finnick shouted as he took out his phone. "This is not a heart attack," Nora snapped, her gaze quickly scanning Silas's face. She took hold of his jaw and forced his mouth open. She bent down close, smelling the air around his mouth. There was a faint, sickeningly sweet smell, like bitter almonds mixed with garlic. His pupils were tiny. His skin was turning blue. He was stiff, not fibrillating. She glanced up at Declan, her heart pounding. What did he consume? What did he drink? We all had the same scotch. "Malin, 25, Declan said, his thoughts racing. "But Silas is on medication. He took a pill just before we ate." "Who gave it to him?" Nora demanded. Declan's expression grew dark as a terrible thought struck him. He looked toward a younger soldier standing by the dining room entrance, a quiet, unassuming driver named Leo. Leo saw the look on Declan's face, spun around, and ran for the service stairway. "Take him alive," Declan barked at Finnick. Without a moment's pause, Finnick chased after the betrayer. Nora focused again on Silas. "It is an organophosphate, or a man-made neurotoxin. It was inside the pill's shell. His breathing is failing." Dr. Sophia Calvetti hurried down the hall, her medical bag swinging. Nora did not wait for her to ask anything. "He was poisoned by a neurotoxin, probably from a capsule about 10 minutes ago." Nora delivered the details with quick, sharp accuracy. "He requires a maximum dose of atropine immediately, and we must intubate him or he will suffocate." Sophia did not argue. She opened the bag quickly, grabbed a pre-filled atropine syringe, and threw a laryngoscope and an endotracheal tube to Nora. "You secure the airway. I will administer the medicine." Nora's hands were surprisingly steady. She skillfully tilted Silas's head back, guiding the metal blade of the laryngoscope past his tongue to see the vocal cords. "I have it in," she announced, carefully pushing the plastic tube into his throat as Sophia injected the needle into Silas's thigh. For 2 very long minutes, Nora squeezed the ambu bag by hand, pushing oxygen into the capo's paralyzed lungs. Gradually, the intense convulsions started to lessen. The awful blue color of his lips began to change back to a pale, unhealthy pink. Sophia took his pulse. "It is getting stable. We have to take him to the underground clinic right away to connect him to a ventilator." As guards came forward to place the unconscious Silas on a stretcher, Nora leaned back heavily against the mahogany wainscoting. Her chest was heaving. Her hands suddenly began to shake without control as the adrenaline wore off. The hallway was soon empty except for Nora and Declan. Declan was standing over her. Outside, the storm was raging, and a lightning flash lit up the hard, severe lines of his face. The weight of what had just occurred filled the space between them. Tobias Russo had paid off one of Declan's own people. The conflict had finally broken through their defenses. Declan bent down, took Nora by her upper arms, and lifted her effortlessly to her feet. He did not release her. He gently pushed her backward until she was against the wall. He was very close, his large body trapping her. He smelled like rain, good scotch, and the sharp, metallic odor of a man prepared for battle. "You have done it again," Declan whispered, his voice incredibly rough. His intense eyes studied her face, taking in every sign of her fatigue. "My safe house has been breached. My men have been bought. And yet, the waitress who works the late shift is the one person keeping my family from death." "I am a nurse," Nora said softly, caught by his powerful stare. "It is my job." "You are a complete miracle," Declan corrected, his voice becoming a low, respectful whisper. Before she could understand the change in his voice, his hand moved from her arm to her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He bent down and his lips met hers with force. This was not a soft kiss. It was desperate, almost bruising, and driven by the rush of near death and betrayal. It tasted like scotch and total control. Nora gasped into his mouth, her hands moving up automatically to push him away. But as soon as her fingers made contact with the hard muscle of his chest, her own body gave in. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him nearer, returning the fierce, unyielding pressure of his kiss. For someone who was always in control, Declan kissed her like a drowning man, and she was the only air available in the room. When he at last moved back, they were both breathing hard. Declan pressed his forehead to hers and closed his eyes. "Leo is going to reveal all of Russo's plans," Declan said quietly, his voice lethal, a sharp change from their close position. "And after that, I will finish this war. But you need to understand this, Nora." He opened his eyes, holding her gaze with a look of pure, frightening confidence. "You are no longer just a debt. You belong to me." The storm ended right before sunrise, leaving behind a thick, still fog that covered the perfect lawns of the Lake Forest estate. Inside, the air was just as heavy, choked with the metallic smell of coming violence. Nora sat on her bed's edge, fully dressed in black pants and a thick sweater. She was unable to sleep. Her lips still felt the memory of Declan's kiss, a clash between two separate worlds. It was a clear sign that she was not just a medical resource or an obligation anymore. She was now deeply involved with the Fitzpatrick Syndicate. In the soundproofed basement below, Declan and Finnick were getting information from the traitor, Leo. Nora felt sick thinking about a mafia questioning, but her practical mind kept analyzing the severe physical damage happening downstairs. At 6 in the morning, her bedroom door opened. Declan was standing in the doorway. His white shirt was open at the neck, the sleeves pushed up to show tense forearms speckled with tiny dark drops of blood. His face was like hard stone, but his dark gray eyes softened just a little when he saw her. "Is it finished?" Nora asked, her voice hoarse in the heavy silence. Declan went directly to the connected bathroom, turned on the water, and started to wash his hands with a rough bar of soap. "Leo talked," Declan said, his voice carrying over the sound of the water. "Russo made threats against his little sister, said he would harm her if he did not give the neurotoxin to Silas." Nora rested against the frame of the bathroom door. "So Russo is trying to isolate you." "It is worse." Declan turned off the faucet and threw the towel to the side. Weariness showed through his tough exterior. "Leo was only the person who delivered it. Russo has a person on the inside, higher up. Someone gave him security patrol times, building plans, and the schedule for the clinic." A chill went down Nora's spine. "Who?" "Barrett," Declan said without emotion. The name felt like a punch to Nora. Barrett was in charge of security for the estate. He was the ex-Marine who had walked Nora through the gardens himself and guarded her door. "He has been giving Russo information for 6 months," Declan went on. "Russo offered him $2 million and control of the Southside routes. Barrett is why I was bleeding all over your counter. Where is he right now? Nora quickly looked toward the hall. Declan glanced at his heavy Rolex watch. He works the day shift and is supposed to be at the main gate in 20 minutes. When he uses his card, the gates will lock behind him. Finnick and I will be waiting in the gatehouse. We will capture him alive, locate Russo, and finish this. He reached out with his clean hands and held Nora's face. His thumbs softly caressed her cheekbones. Stay inside this room. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone except me or Finnick. Do you understand me? Declan. Promise me, he ordered, his voice strained with desperation. Barrett is like a trapped animal. If he figures out that we know, he will use the one person in this house I cannot risk losing. He kissed her on the forehead, a long, protective touch of his lips, before walking out. The heavy door clicked, and the deadbolt locked with a solid sound. Nora walked back and forth in the room, watching the fog move against the large windows. 7 o'clock passed. Then 7:15. There were no gunshots or yelling, only the heavy silence of the huge house. At 7:30, the electricity suddenly went out. The gentle light from the lamps disappeared. The sound of the air conditioning stopped. The emergency generators did not start. A power failure this large meant the primary electrical system and all the backups had been cut by hand. Only the security chief possessed those codes. The knob on her bedroom door jiggled. Nora staggered back, her pulse pounding in her ears. The distinct electronic chirp of a master keycard broke the silence. The lock clicked open. Barrett entered the room. His usual calm and professional attitude had vanished. He was drenched in sweat with a wild look in his eyes, holding a silenced pistol. Move away from that window, Barrett commanded, shutting the door. And keep your hands where I can see them. Declan is aware, Nora stated, her voice a mask of clinical calm. Finnick is down at the gate waiting for you. I know, Barrett sneered. That is why I used the old service tunnels near the lake. Fitzpatrick made a huge error leaving you here alone while he was off chasing shadows. In 3 steps he crossed the room, grabbed Nora hard, and jammed the cold metal suppressor firmly against the side of her head. Walk, he growled, pushing her out the door. You are my get-out-of-jail-free card. Fitzpatrick will let me go right out the front gate if it means keeping your brains intact. As Barrett shoved her down the magnificent grand staircase, Nora's thoughts raced. She pictured the anatomy posters and the body's pressure points. Barrett was bigger and had a gun. A direct fight would be suicide. But she was more than a waitress now. She had brought a mafia boss back from the brink of death. She understood exactly how the human body functions and how it breaks. They finally arrived in the vast marble entryway. The heavy, reinforced front doors were 50 feet away. Do not move, Barrett, the powerful voice boomed from the second-floor balcony. Declan was standing at the top of the stairs, aiming a black assault rifle straight at Barrett's heart. Finnick appeared from the dining room doorway, holding his Glock. 2 more guards emerged from the library. He was completely surrounded. Put the weapon down, you backstabbing snake, Declan ordered, his voice thick with murderous fury. Drop it, or I swear I will strip the flesh from your body as you watch. Barrett stood his ground. He pulled Nora closer, pressing the pistol even harder into her temple. Everyone back off, Fitzpatrick, Barrett shrieked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Lower your weapons or I will splatter her blood all over this marble. Tell your men to open the doors and get an armored car out front. Now! Declan's jaw was a tight line of muscle. He glanced at Nora. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she was not crying. She stared directly at him, sending a silent, urgent plea. Do not let him escape. You are already a ghost, Declan whispered, his quiet voice more chilling than his roars. Russo is not going to protect you. Put down that gun and I will give you a swift end. Open those doors, Barrett bellowed, stumbling backward and pulling Nora along. Nora realized this was her only chance. As Barrett adjusted his footing, his center of gravity shifted for just a moment. Instantly, Nora let her body go completely limp, collapsing her weight while slamming her elbow backward with full force. She struck with surgical precision, sinking her elbow into Barrett's floating ribs, a brutal shot to the unprotected area over his liver. Barrett choked, his body spasming from the sudden, blinding pain, and his grip slackened for less than a second. Nora dropped and rolled across the marble floor. "Get him!" she screamed. The foyer exploded with noise, 3 suppressed rounds fired in perfect sync. 1 shot came from Finnick, and 2 from Declan. The powerful bullets launched Barrett backward, sending him smashing through the glass face of a large grandfather clock. He was dead before the last piece of shattered glass hit the floor. A heavy silence filled the space, interrupted only by a ringing in Nora's ears. Declan was already running down the stairs. His rifle fell to the floor with a clatter as he dropped to his knees and pulled Nora tightly against him. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he searched her for any injuries. "Were you hit?" he asked, the ruthless crime lord completely gone, replaced by a terrified man. "Nora, please look at me." "I am fine," she choked out, hiding her face in his neck and breathing in the smell of smoke. "I am okay." Declan held her in a crushing, protective hug. Finnick nudged the gun from Barrett's dead hand and took a secure burner phone from his vest. "Boss," Finnick said softly. "The last message he sent was a location, a warehouse in Fulton Market. Russo is waiting for his arrival." Declan gently released Nora. The terror in his gaze turned back into solid cold ice. He rose to his feet and helped her up. "Go get Sophia," Declan told Finnick, "and prepare the mobile medical unit. Call every available man. We are all going to Fulton Market." Nora squeezed Declan's hand. "I am coming with you." "No, you need to stay here. You were almost killed on my watch." Nora shot back, her voice now filled with undeniable strength. "Silas was almost killed in your house. Barrett just tried to shoot me in the head. Nowhere is safe now. If you are going to battle, you are going to need a medic." Declan studied her, taking in the fierce determination in her expression. The timid waitress from the diner was completely gone, and in her place was a woman who had been reshaped by his dangerous world. A slow, grim smile crept across his lips. "Finnick," Declan said, his eyes still locked with Nora's, "find the lady a Kevlar vest." The Fulton Market area in Chicago was a confusing maze of old industrial meatpacking buildings. Tobias Russo's warehouse was at the very end of Kinsey Street, a massive brick structure that he had used as a secret operations center for years. At 9:45 a.m., that secrecy was about to end for good. 4 armored trucks burst through the fence, stopping with a loud screech in the main yard. In the back of the 3rd truck, Nora could feel her heart pounding. She had a heavy Kevlar vest on over her clothes, with a medical kit strapped across her chest. Next to her, Dr. Sophia Calvetti was loading a pump-action shotgun without a hint of nervousness. "Stay down behind the engine," Sophia said. "Your job is to patch up holes. Our job is to make them." Before Nora could even respond, Declan exited the first truck, followed by Finnick and 12 heavily armed men. There was no pause. Finnick went to the reinforced side door and blew the hinges clean off with 2 massive shotgun blasts. Declan kicked the broken door in, and the entire Fitzpatrick crew swarmed into the building. The gunfight started immediately. It was a loud and brutal mix of automatic gunfire and crumbling concrete. Russo's men, who had been expecting a simple hostage exchange, were totally unprepared for an all-out attack. "Medic!" a desperate voice cried out over the thunder of the guns. "Go!" Sophia shouted, pushing Nora forward. Nora ran across the concrete floor as bullets sparked off the walls around her. She slid to a stop next to Marco, a young soldier of Declan's, who was gripping his leg where a bullet had gone straight through his thigh. Her fear disappeared, replaced completely by her professional training. Nora tore his pants open, quickly applied a tourniquet high on his leg, and stuffed the wound with blood-clotting gauze. "You are stabilized," she ordered, tightening the tourniquet handle. "Do not move." She glanced up through the grim view of hanging meat hooks. Russo's men were retreating, unable to stop Declan's relentless attack. Declan moved through the battle with a deadly elegance, his rifle firing in short, controlled shots. He was a king fighting in the trenches alongside his men. At the other end of the building, inside a raised office with glass walls, Tobias Russo was yelling into a radio. His expensive silver suit was covered in dust as he desperately called for backup that was never going to come. Declan saw him. "Cover me!" he yelled, dropping his empty rifle and pulling out a custom 1911 pistol. While Finnick unleashed a storm of covering fire, Declan jumped over a conveyor belt and charged up the metal stairs, ignoring the bullets whining past him. He kicked what was left of the office door off its hinges. Nora hurried after him, staying low behind a stack of pallets to keep him in view. Inside the office, Russo lifted a submachine gun. Declan did not even hesitate. He fired 2 shots. Bang, bang. The first bullet destroyed Russo's right shoulder, causing his gun to fall to the ground with a loud clatter. The second bullet hit his right knee, and the rival boss collapsed with a sickening crack. An unnatural quiet descended on the warehouse, broken only by the moans of the injured. When they saw their leader fall, the last of Russo's men gave up. Finnick's team moved in, securing them to the support beams with zip ties. Declan stood over Russo, with smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. "It is over, Toby. Your entire operation is mine. Your very name will be forgotten." Russo spat out a mouthful of blood. "The feds are all over you, Fitzpatrick. They are going to put you away." "They can certainly try," Declan said quietly, aiming the pistol right between Russo's eyes. "Declan, stop!" Nora's voice called from the stairs. She came through the broken doorway into the bloody office. Declan's gaze shifted to her, but his aim remained steady. "You need to leave, Nora." "He is bleeding out from his femoral artery," Nora said, gesturing to the growing puddle of dark blood near Russo's shattered knee. "If you kill him with a shot to the head, the police will find the evidence. It will be an execution. But if he bleeds to death, he is just another body from a gang fight." Declan just looked at her. A brand new sense of admiration and dark humor appeared on his face. He looked back down at Russo, whose face was now a mask of terror as he understood what was happening to him. "You heard her, Toby," Declan said, slowly uncocking the pistol and putting it away. "The waitress says you get to bleed out." Russo turned to Nora, his eyes wide with pain and desperation. "Help me! You are a nurse, I am begging you." Nora stared down at him, her expression completely empty. She remembered her apartment in flames, the sharp knife in the alley, and the cold barrel of a gun pressed to her temple just 1 hour before. She unlatched her medical bag and placed it on the desk, just beyond his reach. "My shift is over," she said quietly. She turned her back on the dying boss and walked toward Declan. He reached out, his strong arm pulling her securely to his side. They left the office together, the sound of Russo's desperate breathing fading behind them. Going down the stairs, they stepped past the fallen bodies of their enemies. Finnick gave a sharp nod, signaling the other men toward the waiting cars. As they exited the dark warehouse, the Chicago sun finally broke through the gray clouds, sending a radiant beam of light across the city. Declan paused beside the open door of his Escalade. He looked down at Nora and gently wiped a streak of grime and blood from her cheek. "It is finished," he whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "The city is ours. You will never need to look over your shoulder again." Nora saw the hard lines on his face and the fierce loyalty in his eyes. She had saved his life on a dirty counter in a diner, and he had set the world on fire for her in return. "I know," she said, rising up to meet his lips. "Take me home, Declan." He gave a true, real smile that finally drove the shadows from his face. He helped her into the armored vehicle, getting in beside her as the convoy roared away, vanishing into the city they now ruled. Ultimately, survival in their world is not about who is the quickest on the draw. It is about who can heal the wounds after the shooting stops. Nora Hayes did more than just save a dying mob boss on a rainy Tuesday evening. She revived an entire empire and created a new, unbreakable dynasty. Declan Fitzpatrick understood that true power was not in a gun or a foreign bank account. It was in the hands of the woman who would walk through hell with him. The Midnight Owl Diner no longer exists. A modern trauma clinic stands there now, funded by a secret benefactor and run perfectly by a woman who traded a waitress uniform for a crown. Blood created their bond, violence was its test, but absolute loyalty made it permanent. They are the undeniable king and queen of Chicago. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.